Now, UK.
Now, the ceasefire between the US and Iran is still in effect, and it's meant to last until April 22nd. But the US blockade in the Strait of Hormuz is putting a strain on it. The spokesperson for Iran's Revolutionary Guard says Washington's actions in the strait are illegal.
The criminal America's restriction on the movement of maritime vessels in international waters is an illegal act and an example of piracy. The armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran explicitly and resolutely declares that the security of ports in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman is either for everyone or for no one. If the security of the ports of the Islamic Republic of Iran in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman is threatened, no port in the Persian Gulf and the Sea of Oman will be safe.
Last night, a Chinese tanker sailed straight through the Strait of Hormuz, past the U.S. Navy blockade, past Trump's warnings, past the threats of interception and seizure, and nothing happened. So did China just expose the biggest bluff in modern military history, or is something more complicated going on? Let's get into it. First, the context. Trump's naval blockade of Iranian shipping officially kicked in at 10 a.m. Eastern on April 13th. The stated goal was simple and aggressive: cut off Iran's oil exports, nearly 2 million barrels a day, by stopping Iranian-linked vessels dead in the water. Trump's message to the world was equally simple: unauthorized ships could face interception, diversion, or outright seizure. Bold, clear, unambiguous. Then, within 24 hours of the blockade starting, a sanctioned Chinese-owned tanker called the Rich Starry sailed right through the strait and kept going. The internet immediately had a name for it: Taco. Trump always chickens out. This ship is worth understanding because it's not just some random vessel. The Rich Starry, previously known as the Full Star, is a medium-range tanker flagged under Malawi. It's owned and operated by Shanghai Sunrun Shipping with a Chinese crew. And critically, the U.S. Treasury already sanctioned this vessel back in 2023, specifically for facilitating Iranian oil exports and helping Iran evade sanctions. On April 14th, 2026, it became the first vessel to successfully exit the Strait of Hormuz since the blockade began. Here's where it gets nuanced, because the full picture is more complicated than the Trump-blinked headline suggests. The Rich Starry didn't leave from an Iranian port. It departed from Sharjah anchorage in the UAE. It was reportedly carrying methanol, not crude oil, and it was heading to China. When the blockade first went live, the ship actually hesitated. It turned back and went drifting near Keshem Island, joining a cluster of other vessels that reversed course entirely. It wasn't initially brazen. It tested the waters, literally and figuratively. Then, on April 14th, it moved again, completed the transit, entered the Gulf of Oman, gone. China's foreign ministry had already made their position crystal clear. Chinese vessels would continue normal operations, and any U.S. interference would be treated as a threat to global energy security and free navigation. So, is Trump tacoing? Critics say yes, and they're loud about it. The argument is simple. You announced a blockade. A sanctioned Chinese ship challenged it on day one, and you did nothing. That's not deterrence. That's a paper tiger. A direct confrontation between the U.S. Navy and a Chinese-operated vessel sounds almost unthinkable. But almost unthinkable is not the same as impossible. And unthinkable things have a way of happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now. One sanctioned Chinese tanker, one successful passage, one blockade, 24 hours old, already facing its first credibility test. Did Trump blink? Did China just open the floodgates for every shadow fleet tanker in the region to follow? We don't have all the answers, but the Rich Starry just made this situation a whole lot more interesting.
Donald Trump is sending thousands more troops to the Iran war zone as the rogue state's defiance ramps up fears of a bloody ground invasion. Several menacing ghost ships were able to slip through the net within hours of the US Navy imposing its blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. Around 6,000 soldiers aboard the USS George H.W. Bush aircraft carrier and its escort ships are heading to the Middle East. More than 3,000 crack airborne troops have already been sent to join 5,000 US Marines closing in on Iran. The Pentagon said the reinforcements will join around 50,000 personnel already involved in operations in the Gulf. Last month, a US Navy ship carrying about 2,500 Marines arrived in the Middle East, and another 2,500 were also deployed from California. The arrival of the additional forces will see 3 aircraft carriers in the region, each with dozens of fighter jets. The USS Abraham Lincoln has been in the Middle East since January, while the USS Gerald R. Ford arrived in the eastern Mediterranean in February. The USS George H.W. Bush is close to the Horn of Africa and on its way to the Middle East. Iran refused to relinquish its nuclear ambitions at last week's crunch peace talks in Pakistan, but J.D. Vance is now prepared to tighten the screws for round 2. If they continue to block peace, Trump's next move may be a potentially catastrophic ground offensive.
Many ships could be seen around the Strait of Hormuz on Saturday, as sources said at least 2 commercial vessels reported being hit by gunfire while trying to cross the waterway. Several others said they received radio messages from Iran's Navy saying they were not allowed to pass. It came as Iran said it was bringing back strict military controls on the vital trade route, saying the United States was still blockading Iranian ports. In a statement reported by Iranian TV, a Revolutionary Guard spokesperson accused the US of repeatedly breaching commitments and, quote, acts of piracy and maritime theft under what it calls a blockade. The state news channel also read out a message by Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who said Iran's navy was ready to inflict new bitter defeats on its enemies. The tough messaging injected fresh uncertainty around the Iran conflict. It raises the risk that oil and gas shipments through the strait could remain disrupted, just as Washington weighs whether to extend a fragile ceasefire.
They can't blackmail us.
US President Donald Trump said dialogue with Iran was ongoing.
We'll have some information by the end of the day. We're talking to them. And, we're taking a tough stand.
American side tweets a lot.
Iran's deputy foreign minister said his country remained committed to diplomacy. But Saeed Khatibzadeh said no further talks with the US would be scheduled until an understanding is agreed that Iran will not give up what it sees as its rights under international law to uranium enrichment.
We are member of Non-Proliferation Treaty. We are member of IAEA. And we are going to commit. We do have responsibilities and we do have rights. Iran is entitled to the rights and we are not going to abandon our rights.
Earlier, maritime trackers had showed a convoy of 8 tankers crossing the strait. It was the first major movement of ships since the US-Israeli war on Iran began 7 weeks ago. Iran had announced its temporary reopening of the strait after a separate 10-day ceasefire agreement on Thursday between Israel and Lebanon, brokered by the US.
Calling on channel 16. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. We will open it by the order of our leader Imam Khamenei, not by the tweets of some idiots.
A dramatic escalation in Gulf waters, as reported. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy broadcast on channel 16, declaring the Strait of Hormuz closed. The message warned all vessels must seek permission to transit, adding that any ship linked to adversaries could be targeted, signaling a sharp rise in maritime tension.
In Persian Gulf and Oman Sea, this is Iranian Sepa Navy calling on channel 16. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. We will open it by the order of our leader Imam Khamenei, not by the tweets of some idiots. If you want to pass through the strait, you must ask permission from Iranian Sepa Navy. All vessels that have a connection with our enemies will be targeted if they try to pass the Strait of Hormuz out.
As reported, the transmission was invoked by Khamenei, stating the strait would reopen only on his orders, not external political messaging, including remarks linked to Donald Trump. The warning positions Iran's naval command at the center of passage control, reinforcing a high-stakes signal over one of the world's most critical energy corridors. Iran redraws the map of global shipping. In the Strait of Hormuz, Tehran positions itself as gatekeeper, as reported by Bloomberg, declaring that every commercial vessel must now seek clearance and pay to pass. A choke point becomes a checkpoint, signaling a decisive shift from presence to control. The message is direct and official. Ebrahim Azizi, head of Iran's National Security Commission, states, "The time has come to comply with the new maritime regime of the Strait of Hormuz. Regulations," he says, "are set by Iran, not external narratives. A firm assertion that authority over transit is now being defined from Tehran."
The time has come to comply with the new maritime regime of the Strait of Hormuz. These regulations are determined by Iran, not by social media posts. Under this new system, only commercial vessels with authorization from the IRGC Navy are permitted to navigate through designated routes after paying the required tolls. If the U.S. attempts to create any disturbance for Iranian ships, this situation can easily be changed.
Under this framework, as reported, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy becomes the arbiter at sea, granting access, defining routes, and determining which vessels qualify for passage. Authorization first, transit later. A structured system that places operational control of one of the world's busiest corridors into a single command chain. The economic dimension is equally sharp. During a ceasefire phase, Iran introduces toll-based passage, turning transit into transaction, with nearly 1/3 of global maritime trade moving through Hormuz. As reported, the policy converts geographic leverage into financial and strategic weight, embedding influence directly into the flow of global energy and commerce. The broader signal is unmistakable. Iran frames this as a formal maritime regime, one that can shift if its shipping faces disruption. As reported by Bloomberg, the move positions Tehran at the center of a critical global artery, where access, cost, and continuity may now be shaped by a new set of rules emerging from the strait itself.
This end of the Middle East, The Hill is reporting that the United States military is preparing to board Iran-linked oil tankers and seize commercial ships in international waters in the coming days. This comes after the United States military announced it has forced 23 ships to turn around near the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. blockade is still in effect, and Iran is saying it's the reason it has changed course, closing the waterway again, and reportedly already shooting at ships trying to cross the key oil transport route. Well, these escalations are the latest in the back and forth between both sides, all ahead of Wednesday's deadline for a peace deal. President Trump is standing firm, saying Iran cannot blackmail America.
The leaders, they have no nothing. Actually, their leaders are, it is regime change. You call that enforced regime change. But we're talking to them. They wanted to close up the strait again, as they've been doing for years. And they can't blackmail us.
So we're going to welcome in GOP strategist and Aloe Ventures managing partner Allison Wynn, and Democratic strategist and strategic communications advisor for the Georgia Senate, Madeline Somerville. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate you being here. Let's dive right in. President Trump is taking another swipe at NATO for not helping in the strait. Let's listen together.
And now that the Hormuz Strait situation is almost over. I received a call from NATO asking if we would like some help. Thank you very much, NATO. And I told them I would have liked your help 2 months ago, but now I really don't want your help anymore.
Right, so we had Mick Mulvaney on the show earlier, and he said even if you don't like his delivery, he has some valid points there. The UK and France had their first talks on post-war plans for the Strait of Hormuz, with more scheduled for next week. So, Madeline, from wars with our enemies to fights with our allies, how do you think voters are viewing Trump's actions on the international stage?
I feel like a kid sitting in the back seat. Are we there yet? Is it almost over? Are we almost done? Oh, we're almost there. I feel like he's placating us constantly to try to keep us quiet. I feel like a little kid here. But when it comes to the NATO connections, so a lot of our allies are feeling frustrated, and I think it was really illustrated best by that the Japanese reporter who spoke to President Trump in the Oval Office when he said, "If we're your allies, why didn't you contact any of us first before you did any of this?
Right.
Why didn't you work with us?" And I think that frustration has permeated into the public in these different countries. And if you keep track of the news there, you can see how disappointed they are and how it's really affected those relationships.
Look, and some have said too, and why didn't you consult Congress ahead of time? And the president maintains, the administration continues to say, the message out of the White House is that they needed that surprise. They had this one opportunity with Israel to be able to take out the top leadership all at the same time. They got so many all in one foul swoop, and they needed that element of surprise. But you know what, the American public, let's take a look at the numbers about how they're feeling about what's going on there. We've got a new Politico poll, and it's showing that just 38% of Americans support this military action there in Iran. And some in Trump's base feel he went back and forth with his promise. He said he was never going to get into these forever wars, and hopefully this doesn't turn into that. With control of the House and the Senate on the line in the midterms in November, Allison, I got to get your take. Are some Republican candidates having to break with the president and possibly condemn the war? Is that what we'll see?
Well, I was one who voted for Trump and Vance on the platform of no more wars, no more endless war. This is not my father's war. And he was in the Vietnam War. And so I'm glad to see President Trump move away from military action. We're now going into economic warfare with the blockade, and also information warfare, which we're not doing so well with some of the Jesus, AI, and Lego stuff. But we are moving away from endless war. I'm happy to report and see that. We need to continue.
Well, we hope so. Blockade. I mean, we hope so. But the ceasefire, it ends on Wednesday. We don't know if bombs are going to be starting to drop, if it's going to hold, or if it's going to, we'll see that happen in the next few days, or on Thursday or Friday. I mean, your guess is as good as mine. The president, when he's asked about it, or Kelly Meyer asked him on the plane, what's going to happen? And he just said, maybe I'll do this, and maybe I'll do this. We'll have to see.
Democrats, it's the element of surprise.
Yeah.
Here's Joe from Georgia, and this is an update on what the future looks like for the Iran war. Folks, the senators got a briefing today from the Department of Defense about the plans for this war. And folks, it is a full-on war. And lots of senators coming out of the meeting says that it is worse than any of us are even thinking. And what they're talking about is boots on the ground in Iran. Folks, they're looking to put our soldiers in harm's way over what's happening in Iran. And folks, are we fighting this war for Israel? Because that's what this kind of feels like. It's just kind of like the weapons of mass destructions back in 2003, where the United States went to war over something that didn't even exist. Well, we're at it again, folks. And remember, this is coming from an administration that says they would not have any wars, that they were stopping wars all across the world, which is not true.